Think your smartphone took a long time to develop? Try waiting 1,500 years to figure out how to melt iron properly. That's exactly what happened to Europe. And this delay didn't just affect their tools. It starved their populations, lost them wars, and nearly got them wiped off the map by Mongol horsemen. Let's go back to where iron started. Around 1700 BC, a group called the Hittites became the first people to work with iron weapons. These weren't peaceful farmers. They crushed ancient Babylon, went toe-to-toe with Egypt, and only fell when the Assyrians destroyed them. But their iron knowledge spread like wildfire. Europe got lucky with one thing. Their iron ore was high quality, packed with iron, low on junk. Heat it up, the silicon melts away, smash open the furnace, pull out the glowing core, hammer out the slag, and you've got wrought iron, perfect for swords and farm tools. For thousands of years, through the Roman Empire and deep into the Middle Ages, Europe stuck with this bloomery iron method. Wars were constant. Steel demand was massive. But instead of inventing something new, craftsmen just tweaked the old system. They built permanent stone furnaces lined with clay. After each smelt, they'd hook out the bloom and patch up the clay lining. No more smashing the whole furnace every time. Smart, right? They also invented cementation furnaces. Hammer wrought iron into bars, stack them with charcoal, light it up for days, carbon seeps into the iron and boom, you've got steel. Way faster than hammering carbon in one strike at a time. Bloomery iron had one huge advantage. It was pure. Hammer out all the slag and you get metal that's perfect for noble weapons. But here's the problem. Production was pathetically low. Prices were insane. Only aristocrats could afford iron weapons. Peasants? They made do with wooden tools. Compare this to the East, where archaeologists find iron farming tools everywhere. Medieval Europe couldn't produce enough iron for agriculture. Their crop yields were embarrassing. Plant 1 pound of seed, harvest 2 pounds of grain. Even right before the Industrial Revolution, they only hit a ratio of 1 to 4. Farmers didn't weed, didn't fertilize, just prayed to God and hoped for the best. This is why religion dominated European minds so completely. They had no control over their harvests. Cities reeked of sewage flowing through streets. Rats swarmed everywhere, plagues killed millions. Meanwhile, across the world in the East, seed-to-harvest ratios hit 1 to 20. They had people whose entire job was collecting human waste for fertilizer. Europe's pray and hope strategy exhausted their soil fast. By the 9th century, they invented the 3-field system. Split land into 3 sections, plant 2, let 1 rest. Europeans treated this like it was revolutionary. The iron shortage crippled their farming and pushed them toward the ocean early. While they struggled, the East invented ridge tillage, plant crops in raised rows. Air flows better, irrigation's easier, weeding and fertilizing become simple. Here's the genius part. Next planting season, swap the ridges and furrows. Instant crop rotation without leaving land empty. Work hard and you're guaranteed a good harvest. Secular life stayed central. They could mass-produce molten iron. Sure, it had high carbon content, but quantity beat quality. They invented the curved moldboard plow pulled by oxen. This made ridge tillage actually possible. With better productivity, the Warring States period didn't just have feudal skirmishes. They launched wars with hundreds of thousands of soldiers to completely destroy rival kingdoms. By the Warring States period, different regions were already developing different writing systems. If they hadn't unified quickly, regional differences would have become ethnic differences. The East would have shattered into fragments like Europe did. In 1235, the Mongols launched their second great Western invasion. Europe discovered in sheer terror that the scourge of God had returned. Mongol armies moved unpredictably. They seemed to need no supply lines. They appeared out of nowhere and struck without warning. Europe's low productivity couldn't support large professional armies. Only a handful of nobles could afford decent armor. Most soldiers were peasants playing soldier. There wasn't enough grain for extended campaigns. European forces had to fight short, desperate battles.
You see European armies gambling on aggressive attacks over and over in history. They charge into terrible positions and get annihilated. It wasn't because their commanders were idiots. They had no grain reserves. They needed quick, decisive battles. Defense was impossible too. A king's tiny castle held maybe a few dozen people. It couldn't withstand a siege by thousands. Compare this to the East. Higher productivity meant they could build massive city walls, protect entire populations behind fortifications, build walls to defend the army, construct moats to protect the people. The Song dynasty's fishing town fortress could grow grain and raise fish inside the walls. They held out for decades. Europeans couldn't win battles, couldn't defend cities. They were being slaughtered on one side. Then, right when things looked hopeless, news arrived. The great Khan Ogedei had died back home. Mongol forces withdrew to settle the succession. That's what saved Europe. But the Mongols left behind gifts: gunpowder and Eastern iron smelting techniques. After the Mongols left, Europe descended into wars and plagues. The landscape was littered with kings and castles. Gunpowder changed everything. Cannons blasted castle walls far better than trebuchets ever could. Traditional forging couldn't make massive cannons. You had to cast them. That meant melting iron completely in much hotter furnaces. The East had been using blast furnaces since the spring and autumn period. 1,500 years later, Europe finally figured it out. They started building blast furnaces and smelting cast iron for casting cannons. Europe stood on Eastern shoulders and began developing their own technical evolution. Gradually, they added their own innovations. The Black Death killed a third of Europe's population. Unlike the East, labor was suddenly scarce. Europe's terrain was also different. Mountains everywhere, rivers everywhere. Water power became their signature innovation. They invented clever devices. Bellows were two wedge-shaped leather bags connected to cams on water wheels. As the wheel turned, the bags inflated and deflated in sequence, providing continuous airflow. Nearby, they built massive reservoirs. China had similar devices called the water-powered trip hammer from the Eastern Han Dynasty. Water wheels powered mechanical hammers using cam principles. These could lift hammerheads weighing over 300 kilograms, replacing blacksmiths entirely. They also had water-powered blade wheels and rolling mills to cut and compress steel. Building on Eastern steel frying methods, Europeans created finery forges. Molten cast iron oxidized before the furnace mouth, losing carbon and becoming wrought iron. Then they adjusted it in cementation furnaces. Finally, they could mass-produce cast iron and steel like the East had been doing for centuries. Europeans cast cannons. Military power skyrocketed. They immediately plunged into endless wars. Heretics and heathens, popes and kings, city-states versus city-states. War drove innovation. European iron smelting and firearms technology advanced rapidly. They actually caught up to the East. The world entered a phase of East-West mutual inspiration. The Portuguese brought breech-loading swivel guns to the East. The Ming dynasty studied them, developed improvements, and standardized mass production for their armies. During the Wanli era, Ming forces used these weapons to demolish Japanese invasion forces in Korea. After the Mongols left, Western European kingdoms continued their eastward crusades. They'd already launched 6 before. After this, they crusaded 3 more times, fighting Arabs constantly. But Arabs had also been crushed by Mongols. They also got gunpowder technology. Neither side had a technological advantage. In the early 14th century, the Ottoman Empire rose and pushed back aggressively. In 1453, the Ottomans cast the Basilica cannon. This monster gun smashed through Constantinople's 1,000-year-old walls. The Byzantine Empire fell. European nations panicked. They couldn't win.
At this moment, Western European commerce exploded. They needed real silver and gold. They craved expensive silk and porcelain. But the Ottoman Empire blocked the trade routes between East and West. They couldn't reach the wealthy East or India. Western Europe turned to the ocean. Portugal and Spain, closest to the Atlantic, started sending out expeditions first. Waves of adventurers appeared. Columbus's discovery pushed this gamble to its peak. In 1492, Columbus left Palos port in Spain with 87 sailors betting their lives. They sailed into the deep blue ocean where none had dared venture before. The curtain rose on the age of exploration. Here's what blows my mind about this whole story. Europe's iron problem wasn't just about metal. It was about food, about walls, about surviving. For over 1,000 years, they were trapped in a cycle. Low iron production meant primitive farming. Primitive farming meant constant hunger. Hunger meant weak armies. Weak armies meant tiny territories and endless wars. They prayed because they had no other options. Their cities were death traps. 1 in 3 people died during the Black Death. That's not a tragedy, that's an apocalypse. The worst part? They knew better technology existed. Traders told stories about eastern cities with massive walls, about farmers who could feed enormous populations. But Europe couldn't copy it. They lacked the furnaces. They lacked the knowledge. They lacked the iron. So they did what desperate people do. They adapted. They built water wheels. They mechanized everything possible. They got creative with the little they had. When Europeans finally got blast furnaces working, everything changed. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily. More iron meant more plows. More plows meant more food. More food meant bigger populations. Bigger populations meant professional armies. Professional armies meant they could finally fight back. The Ottomans blocked the land routes? Fine. Build ships. Lots of ships. Put cannons on those ships. Sail west to reach the east. Think about the desperation required to sail into an ocean nobody had ever crossed. You've got 87 men on wooden ships. No GPS, no radios, no weather forecasts. You're not even sure there's land on the other side. You're doing it because staying home means poverty, war, and plague. The ocean might kill you, but staying put definitely will. That's the choice Columbus faced. The crazy thing is, Europe's weakness became their strength. They couldn't fight the Ottomans on land, so they went around them by sea. They couldn't grow enough food at home, so they conquered lands where they could. They couldn't compete with Eastern production, so they stole Eastern silver and bought Eastern goods. Their centuries of struggling with bad iron technology taught them to innovate constantly, to take risks, to try anything that might work. By the time we reach 1492, Europe has finally caught up. They've got blast furnaces pumping out cast iron. They've got cannons that can flatten city walls. They've got ships tough enough to cross oceans. And they've got populations desperate enough to colonize anywhere that promises a better life. The Iron Age that should have started 1,500 years earlier has finally arrived, and it's about to reshape the entire world. The irony kills me. The Hittites figured out iron weapons in 1700 BC. By 200 BC, the East was mass-producing iron tools and revolutionizing agriculture. Europe? They're still hammering out tiny blooms of wrought iron in 1400 AD. That's 1,600 years of technological lag. 1,600 years of unnecessary poverty. 1,600 years of losing wars they should have won, all because they couldn't build a hot enough furnace. But here's the thing. Once they figured it out, they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Centuries of deprivation created a hunger for expansion that couldn't be satisfied. They'd spent too long being poor, being invaded, being sick. Now they had the tools to change everything, and they were going to use them. The age of exploration wasn't about curiosity. It was about survival. It was about finally having the technology to take what they needed instead of praying for it. So next time you're annoyed your Amazon package takes 2 days instead of 1, remember this. Your ancestors waited 16 centuries for someone to figure out how to make enough iron for a decent plow. 2 days isn't that long after all.